There are some stories that do not begin with hope. They begin with silence, pain, and unanswered prayers. This is one of them. Verse, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Bible. In a crowded city hospital surrounded by noise, bright lights, and rushing footsteps sat a 17-year-old boy named Daniel. It was nearly midnight. Rain poured outside the building, tapping endlessly against the glass windows. Nurses walked quickly through the hallways. Doctors moved from room to room. Families waited anxiously for good news. But Daniel sat completely alone. A few hours earlier, his mother had collapsed while working at a small roadside food shop where she spent long days trying to provide enough money for rent, food, and school fees. Now she was lying inside the ICU. Machines surrounded her bed. Doctors spoke in serious tones, and every update sounded worse than the one before. Daniel had already spent everything they had. The small amount of money in his pocket was gone. The neighbors who once promised support stopped answering calls. Even close relatives suddenly became busy. At first, Daniel tried to stay strong. He kept telling himself, "Everything will be okay. God will make a way. Mom will survive." But hour after hour, fear slowly crushed those words. He walked to the hospital balcony and stared into the dark rain. For the first time in his life, he felt completely abandoned, not just by people, but by God. Daniel had grown up believing in prayer. His mother taught him to trust God during every season of life. Before school, before meals, before sleep, they always prayed together. But that night felt different. That night, heaven felt silent. He whispered softly, "God, where are you?" No answer came, only the sound of rain. He lowered his head and cried quietly, trying not to let anyone see him breaking apart. Minutes passed. Then an elderly security guard noticed him sitting alone near the staircase. The guard had seen many people in that hospital over the years, people celebrating births, mourning deaths, praying desperately for miracles. But something about the boy's face caught his attention. It was the look of someone losing hope. The old man slowly walked toward him carrying 2 small paper cups of tea. Without saying much, he sat beside Daniel and handed him one. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the old man quietly said, "Some of the strongest people I've seen in this hospital are the ones who wanted to give up, but stayed anyway." Daniel looked down silently. The guard continued, "Pain makes people think God has left them, but sometimes pain is where he stays closest." Those words hit Daniel deeply, not because they sounded powerful, not because they solved his problems instantly, but because someone finally understood his pain. For hours, people had walked past him without noticing the tears in his eyes, but this stranger stopped. That small act of kindness broke the wall Daniel had built around his emotions. He began crying uncontrollably in the middle of the hallway. The security guard didn't interrupt him. He didn't preach. He didn't try to sound wise. He simply sat beside him in silence. And somehow that silence felt warmer than all the empty words Daniel had heard that night. A few hours later, the doctors came out of the ICU again. This time, the news was slightly better. His mother's condition had stabilized. She was still weak, still in danger, but alive. For the first time that night, Daniel felt a tiny spark of hope return. Not a huge miracle, not instant healing, just enough strength to keep going. Days turned into weeks. Recovery was slow. Daniel worked small jobs after school to help pay medical bills. Some days he slept only a few hours. Some days he wanted to quit everything. But he remembered the words spoken in that hallway. Pain is where God stays closest. Years later, Daniel would tell people that the hospital night changed his life forever. Not because it was easy, but because it taught him something powerful. God's presence is not always loud. Sometimes he comes quietly, through a stranger, through kindness, through unexpected strength, through the courage to survive one more day. Daniel eventually became a counselor for struggling teenagers. Every time he met someone who felt abandoned, he shared the same lesson. The worst night of my life became the night I discovered I was never truly alone. And whenever people asked him which Bible verse carried him through life, he always smiled and answered, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Because to Daniel, that verse was not just words written on a page, it was his story. It was the story of a broken heart discovering that even in silence, God was still there.